Welcome to Ytd'z History, where we bring the most powerful moments from the past to life. Dive in, explore, and discover the stories that shaped our world. Let's make history unforgettable. Bale Elementary School. It's a name that, before the event, probably wouldn't have meant much to anyone outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. It was just a school, a one-story brick building with long hallways that smelled of chalk dust and floor wax. Kids would run down these halls, their sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Teachers would stand in doorways, ushering them into classrooms filled with colorful posters and mismatched chairs. It was a place of learning, of scraped knees on the playground, of friendships forged over shared crayons and whispered secrets. It was, in every sense of the word, ordinary. A place where the biggest drama of the day might be a pop quiz in math or a surprise dessert in the cafeteria. It was a cornerstone of the community, a predictable and safe space for hundreds of children. Think about your own elementary school. The memories are probably a jumble of small, seemingly insignificant moments. The feel of the monkey bars, the sound of the bell signaling recess, the specific way the sunlight hit the dust motes dancing in the air of your third-grade classroom. That was Bale Elementary. It was the backdrop for countless childhoods, a place that held the collective memory of a community growing up. Parents dropped their kids off at the curb each morning with a quick kiss and a "have a good day." They trusted the school. They trusted the teachers. They trusted that this building, this institution, was a sanctuary from the complexities and dangers of the outside world. It was a promise, unspoken but understood, that their children would be safe here. The school was built in the 1950s, a product of that post-war optimism. It had seen generations of students pass through its doors. Grandparents who attended Bale now watched their own grandchildren walk the same hallways. There was a rhythm to life at the school, a comforting predictability that synced with the seasons. Fall meant homecoming parades and pumpkin carving contests. Winter brought holiday pageants and the hope of a snow day. Spring was field day, the smell of freshly cut grass, and the restless energy of summer approaching. It was a cycle year after year, a constant in the lives of the families it served, a place defined by its normality. But that's the thing about stories like this one. They always begin in the ordinary. The horror doesn't announce itself. It creeps in, unnoticed, under the cover of a perfectly normal day. On September 15, 1959, the sun rose over Little Rock just as it always did. Parents got their children ready for school. Breakfast was eaten, teeth were brushed, backpacks were slung over shoulders. The yellow school buses made their familiar routes, picking up students who were likely more concerned with seeing their friends than with the day's lessons. It was just another Tuesday. No one at Bale Elementary had any reason to believe that this day would be violently, irrevocably different from all the days that had come before it. The morning of September 15th unfolded with its usual rhythm. Students settled into their classrooms. The Pledge of Allegiance was recited, a chorus of young voices echoing through the school. Attendance was taken. In Mrs. Eloise Strange's fifth-grade class, the students were likely getting out their books, the rustle of paper filling the room. It was 8:25 a.m. The school day was just beginning. Outside, the world was moving along as it should. Traffic flowed on the nearby streets. Businesses opened. The machinery of daily life was in full swing, completely oblivious to the fact that a terrible countdown had already begun, its final seconds ticking away inside the school itself. This was 1959. It's important to remember the context. Little Rock was a city still raw from the school integration crisis just 2 years prior. The Little Rock Nine had integrated Central High School under the escort of federal troops, an event that had put the city on the world stage. Tensions were high. The air was thick with political conflict, segregationist anger, and the struggle for civil rights. Governor Orville Faubus had even closed all of Little Rock's public high schools for the 1958-59 school year to prevent further integration, an event known as the Lost Year. The city was a powder keg of social and racial animosity, but Bale was an elementary school. It was for younger kids, and it was an all-white school. It seemed to many to be insulated from the direct conflict that had engulfed the high schools. Yet, the anger that permeated the city didn't just disappear. It festered. It looked for outlets, for symbols, and in the minds of some, any public institution, any part of the system they felt was being forced to change, became a target. The hatred wasn't surgical, it was a blunt instrument. And on this particular Tuesday morning, that instrument was being aimed at the most vulnerable of places, a place filled with children. So while the students at Bale Elementary were practicing their multiplication tables, something else was happening. A plan, born of that festering hatred, was reaching its conclusion. Someone had walked onto the school grounds, likely unnoticed. Perhaps they looked like a parent or a delivery person. They carried with them a package. Not a gift, but a device built for destruction. It contained 29 sticks of dynamite, a crude but powerful bomb. That package was placed near a window of the principal's office, a strategic spot. The clock was ticking not just on a classroom wall, but on the detonator of an explosive device. The ordinary morning was a fragile illusion about to be violently torn apart. At 8:27 a.m., the illusion ended. The 29 sticks of dynamite exploded. The sound was deafening, a massive, concussive boom that ripped through the morning calm. It wasn't just a noise, it was a physical force that shook the entire building to its foundation. Windows in the school and in nearby homes shattered instantly, sending shards of glass flying like shrapnel. The west wing of Bale Elementary, where the principal's office was located, was obliterated. Bricks and mortar were blasted outwards, and a thick, choking cloud of dust and smoke billowed into the sky, obscuring the sun. The ordinary sounds of a school day, the chatter of children, the voice of a teacher, were replaced by a terrifying silence, and then by screams. Inside the classrooms, chaos erupted. Children who had been sitting at their desks one moment were thrown to the floor the next. The world became a disorienting mess of noise, dust, and fear. Plaster fell from the ceilings. Light fixtures swung violently. Doors were blown off their hinges. Mrs. Strange's fifth-grade classroom, located near the blast, was devastated. She later described how the children were screaming, crying, and trying to crawl under their desks for safety. They didn't understand what was happening. Was it an earthquake? A plane crash? The concept of a bomb, of a deliberate attack on their school, was beyond their comprehension. All they knew was terror. The immediate aftermath was a scene of pure pandemonium. Teachers, dazed and injured themselves, fought to regain control, their first instinct to protect the children. They began herding the terrified students out of the crumbling building, away from the smoke and the danger of further collapse. Some children were bleeding, cut by flying glass. Others were simply in shock, their faces pale and streaked with dirt. The playground, once a place of joy, became a triage center. Frantic parents, hearing the explosion from their homes and workplaces, began descending on the school, their hearts pounding with a singular, terrifying question: is my child alive? The air filled with the sound of approaching sirens, a wail that cut through the lingering ringing in everyone's ears. Police cars and fire trucks converged on the scene, their crews met with a sight of utter devastation. It looked like a war zone. Firefighters began battling the blaze that had erupted from the explosion, while police officers tried to secure the area and help with the evacuation. The initial reports were confused, but one thing was horrifyingly clear. Bale Elementary School had been bombed. An act of violence had been committed against children. The innocence of this place and of this community had been shattered in a single, thunderous moment. The images from that day are stark. They are black and white, but the horror they depict is vivid. One of the most circulated photographs shows a firefighter, his face grim, carrying a small, soot-covered boy away from the wreckage. The boy's eyes are wide, his expression a mixture of confusion and shock. He clutches a small toy or a book, a poignant reminder of the normal school day that was stolen from him. This single image captured the heart of the tragedy, the collision of childhood innocence with calculated adult violence. It's a photo that doesn't need a caption to tell its story. It speaks of vulnerability, of rescue, and of a profound sense of violation. Another set of photographs documents the physical destruction. They show the gaping hole in the side of the building, a wound of brick and twisted metal. The principal's office is simply gone, reduced to a pile of rubble. Classroom windows are empty, jagged frames. Desks and chairs are visible inside, overturned and covered in debris. These pictures are crucial because they provide a scale of the attack. This wasn't a small device. It was a powerful bomb intended to cause maximum damage. Looking at these images, it feels like a miracle that no one was killed. The sheer force required to rip a brick building apart is immense. Then there are the videos. Grainy newsreel footage from 1959 shows the chaos in motion. You can see groups of children huddled together on the school lawn, some crying, others just staring blankly at what used to be their school. Parents are running towards them, their faces etched with panic as they search for their child in the crowd. Police officers are trying to create order out of the chaos, their movements urgent. The footage captures the raw, unfiltered emotion of the moment. It's not a dramatic reenactment, it's history as it happened. Watching it, you can almost feel the grit in the air and the tremor of fear that ran through the crowd. These visual records are more than just evidence, they are a testament. They ensure that what happened at Bale Elementary is not forgotten or minimized. They prevent the story from becoming an abstract historical event. The photos of the children's faces, the footage of the frantic parents, the stark images of the building's wound, they make it real. They force us to confront the human cost of the bombing. They show us not just what was destroyed, but who was targeted. It was an attack on a building, yes, but more than that, it was an attack on the children inside it and on the very idea of a school as a safe haven. In the middle of this story are the people. The victims were the 214 students and their teachers who were inside Bale Elementary that morning. While miraculously, no one died in the initial blast, 21 students and one teacher, Mrs. Strange, were injured, mostly from flying glass and debris. One young boy, Billy Ray Jones, suffered severe cuts to his face and eyes. Another, Herbert Ruck, was hit by falling plaster. These weren't just numbers on a casualty list. They were children who went to school one morning and ended up in a hospital. Their sense of security just shattered. Their physical wounds would eventually heal, but the psychological scars would last a lifetime. Then there were the first responders. Men like Fire Chief Gan Nally and Police Chief Eugene G. Smith. They were the ones who ran towards the danger. Chief Nally coordinated the effort to extinguish the fire that threatened to consume what was left of the school. His firefighters navigated the unstable structure, pulling out records and equipment while battling the flames. Chief Smith's officers had the dual task of securing a crime scene and managing a crowd of hysterical parents. They had to be both law enforcement and counselors in that moment, offering what little comfort they could while trying to piece together what had just happened. Their professionalism in the face of such a horrific scene was a small beacon of order in the chaos. The investigation quickly focused on a group of suspects, men known for their fervent segregationist beliefs and their vocal opposition to the city's attempts at integration. The key figures who emerged were E.A. Lauderdale, a hot-tempered gas station attendant, and J.D. Sims, a local handyman. Both were outspoken members of the Capitol Citizens Council, a white supremacist group. Police believed they were part of a small radical cell that had decided to escalate their protest from words to violence. Another man, Jesse Raymond Perry, was also implicated. These were not criminal masterminds. They were men consumed by a hateful ideology, who saw violence as a legitimate tool to preserve their way of life. And we have to talk about the witnesses, people in the neighborhood who heard the blast and saw the smoke. And crucially, people who had seen suspicious activity. Investigators began canvassing, asking questions. Had anyone seen an unfamiliar car? Had anyone seen men near the school? Slowly, a picture began to form. A witness reported seeing a car matching the description of Lauderdale's vehicle near the school shortly before the explosion. Another piece of the puzzle came from an informant who tied the men to previous, smaller bombing incidents in the city. The faces in this story are a mosaic: the terrified children, the determined rescuers, and the hate-filled perpetrators. The investigation moved quickly. This wasn't a crime that the city or the nation was going to tolerate. The bombing of a school was a line that, once crossed, demanded an immediate and forceful response. The FBI was called in to assist the Little Rock police. Within hours, the rubble was being sifted not just for survivors, but for clues. Investigators were looking for any fragment of the bomb. Pieces of a timing device, wire, a battery, anything that could trace back to its origin. They knew the bomb was made of dynamite, a common explosive at the time, but they needed more. They needed evidence that would connect a person to the crime. The break in the case came not from a piece of wire, but from a person. An informant who had previously provided tips to the police about segregationist activities came forward with critical information. This informant linked E.A. Lauderdale and J.D. Sims to the bombing. This wasn't just a hunch. The informant had specific details. This testimony gave the police the leverage they needed to bring the suspects in for questioning. It transformed them from persons of interest into the primary targets of the investigation. The puzzle pieces, which had been scattered by the blast, were starting to come together. Lauderdale and Sims were arrested. During interrogation, their stories began to crumble. Eventually, one of them confessed. E.A. Lauderdale admitted to his role in the bombing. He laid out the plan, implicating Sims and another man, Jesse Perry. He explained their motive. It was an act of protest. They wanted to stir up chaos and galvanize opposition to the school board, which they felt was caving to federal pressure on integration. They chose Bale Elementary, a school in a working-class white neighborhood, believing an attack there would enrage the white community and fuel the segregationist cause. It was a chillingly political calculation that used children as pawns. With the confession, the case was solidified. The community's response was not what the bombers had intended. Instead of stoking segregationist anger, the attack horrified and disgusted the city. The Arkansas Gazette, a pro-integration newspaper that had already won a Pulitzer Prize for its coverage of the Central High Crisis, condemned the bombing in the strongest terms. Civic and religious leaders from across the city, including many who were segregationists themselves, publicly denounced the act. They declared that bombing schools and terrorizing children was not an acceptable form of protest. The bombers had miscalculated badly. They had hoped to be seen as heroes of their cause. Instead, they were viewed as villains. The immediate aftermath of the bombing left Little Rock in a state of shock. The city had grown accustomed to tension, to protests, to political strife. But this was different. This was an attack on children. It crossed a moral boundary that united people from opposite ends of the political spectrum in condemnation. The day after the bombing, the headline of the Arkansas Gazette screamed, "Bomb rocks Bale School." The story dominated the news, not just locally, but nationally. The city, which had been trying to repair its image after the Central High Crisis, was once again in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. The community's reaction was a mixture of fear, anger, and a surprising surge of solidarity. Parents across the city were terrified. If Bale could be bombed, was any school safe? Attendance at other schools dropped in the days following the attack as worried parents kept their children home. But alongside the fear was a powerful wave of outrage. A reward fund for information leading to the arrest of the bombers was established, and donations poured in from all corners of the community. Business leaders, church groups, and private citizens contributed. It was a clear message. The people of Little Rock would not stand for this. The students of Bale Elementary were displaced. Their school was a crime scene, a ruin. Arrangements had to be made quickly to get them back into a classroom setting, to restore some semblance of normality to their shattered lives. They were temporarily relocated to the Ytd'z Elementary School, where they attended classes in the afternoon after the Ytd'z students had gone home. It was a temporary solution, a makeshift arrangement born of necessity. Imagine being a child, already traumatized by an explosion, now having to go to a different school, at a different time, your entire routine upended. It was another layer of disruption in their young lives. This event became a turning point for many in the community. For some moderate segregationists, the bombing was a wake-up call. It demonstrated the violent endpoint of the extremist rhetoric they had tolerated or even encouraged. While they may have disagreed with integration, they could not condone terrorism against children. The bombing had the opposite effect of what its perpetrators intended. Instead of galvanizing the segregationist movement, it fractured it. It forced people to choose a side, and the vast majority chose the side of law, order, and basic human decency over violent extremism. The community began to pull together, not in support of the bombers' cause, but in opposition to their methods. The legal process moved forward. E.A. Lauderdale, J.D. Sims, and Jesse Perry were put on trial. Given Lauderdale's confession and the evidence against them, the prosecution felt it had a strong case. However, the trials were complex, reflecting the divided state of the city. The first trial resulted in a hung jury. It was a frustrating outcome for the prosecution and for a community desperate for justice. It showed that even in the face of such a heinous crime, there were still those on the jury who were sympathetic to the bombers' segregationist cause, or at least unwilling to convict them. Eventually, justice was served, though it took time. At a subsequent trial, Lauderdale was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Sims was also convicted. The sentences may seem light by today's standards for such a crime, but at the time, securing a conviction against white men for a racially motivated crime in the South was a significant victory for the justice system. It sent a message that there were consequences for such acts of terror, even if those consequences felt inadequate to some. The convictions helped to close a painful legal chapter, but the emotional chapter remained wide open for the community. For the students of Bale Elementary, the echoes of the explosion lingered long after the rubble was cleared. Many of them carried the trauma for years. Some developed a fear of loud noises. Others struggled with anxiety. The school, once a place of safety, was now a place associated with terror. When Bale Elementary was eventually rebuilt and reopened, it was a different place. The physical structure was new, but the memory of what happened there was embedded in its foundation. Every student who walked its halls afterward did so in the shadow of the events of September 15, 1959. The bombing also had a lasting echo on the city of Little Rock. It became part of the city's difficult history with the civil rights movement, another scar alongside the Central High crisis. It served as a brutal reminder of the violence that underpinned the fight against desegregation. But it also became a story of resilience. The community's overwhelming rejection of the bombing, the conviction of the perpetrators, and the eventual rebuilding of the school showed a city choosing to move forward, away from the politics of hate. The echo of the bomb was a sound of destruction, but the response was one of determination and a collective desire for peace. Today, more than 65 years have passed since the bombing. Bale Elementary School no longer exists as it did then. The original building was eventually torn down, and a new school with a new name stands in a different location. The site of the original school is now just a piece of land, a quiet space in a residential neighborhood. There is no large monument, no grand memorial. For many people who drive past, it's just an empty lot. But for those who know the history, it's a place that holds a powerful story. It's a physical scar on the landscape of Little Rock, a reminder of a dark day in the city's past. The impact of the Bale Elementary bombing resonates beyond the city limits of Little Rock. It stands as a chilling precursor to other acts of domestic terrorism in American history, including the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. It demonstrates a terrifying pattern, the use of violence against civilian targets, including children, to make a political statement. The logic of the Bale bombers, that an attack on the innocent would provoke a desired political reaction, is the same twisted logic used by terrorists throughout history. The story of Bale is a crucial chapter in the larger story of extremism in America. What is the ultimate legacy of this event? It's a story of survival. It's the story of 214 children who walked out of a bombed-out school, shaken but alive. It's the story of a community that, when faced with an act of pure hatred, chose unity over division. It's a testament to the journalists who reported the truth, the law enforcement officers who sought justice, and the ordinary citizens who refused to let fear and violence win. The bombers failed. They failed to stop integration, and they failed to turn the community towards their cause. Their act of destruction ultimately led to a moment of moral clarity. And so, we are left with the memory, a memory preserved in old photographs, grainy newsreels, and the stories of those who were there. It's a story that needs to be told, not to sensationalize a tragedy, but to understand it. To understand how hatred can lead to violence, how political rhetoric can have deadly consequences, and how a community can find strength in its darkest hour. The bombing of Bale Elementary School is a scar, not just on the landscape of Little Rock, but on the conscience of a nation. And it is by remembering these scars that we learn and hopefully prevent them from happening again.